Back in 2018, we'd heard a number of community folks had come to us in our citizens' inquiry into agriculture, and were talking about the impacts of large corporate interests, the water that they were taking, and the state of the Barker. I'd been known for decades that the Murray-Darling system was in trouble, but when we heard from people in 2018 what was happening, we scheduled a trip down to visit folks and communities in different towns along the Barker River, and that was before the massive fish kills. So what triggered our interest was two things. Number one, ordinary Aussies worried about our fellow Aussies and the landscape that we love and think is important. But number two, my organisation, AILA, the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, several years previous had created the Australian People's Tribunal for Community and Nature's Rights. So the APT, as we call it, was specifically created to help community people tell the story of what was going on when they felt the legal system or political system was failing them. So when we scheduled the 2019 trip, we wanted to hear from people. We wanted to hear their stories and at least play a small part in telling their stories truthfully about what was going on. What we heard from community people was devastating, and I have to say the 2 weeks we spent out there, it felt like a war zone. People were deeply in shock. They were suffering from terrible water quality, having to buy water. Everyone was frightened, everyone was worried, and really they were in a kind of shock that this had come to the way it was and that the government and other authorities were not only not helping, but were actually making things worse. Water doesn't just belong to the people. Really, we have to understand the ecosystems themselves and enable and allow water to continue doing its thing. There's a movement around the world called the rights of nature, and whether you love it or hate it, the idea is that we recognise that the living world has intrinsic value beyond what humans do with it, and that the only way to understand what living systems need is to actually understand them the way that the ancient peoples of this continent know a place. They know what a river needs to live, they know what all the animals and plants need to live, and let it happen. What we can do as ordinary Australians, particularly around the complexity of the Murray-Darling Basin and the Barker River, is a number of things. Number one, be aware. One of the biggest problems we discovered was this feeling of isolation that a lot of folks out in the West had, that the majority of the population living in the cities didn't know and didn't care. So if people can be aware of what's going on with water around them, in their own place and in other places, join groups like land care and water care groups, water keepers, but then we have to engage in the political process at some point, and whether you're just voting in people who care about water health or being more vocal and being an activist, the system we have right now for the Barker is absolutely systemically problematic. The whole system is not broken. It's been designed to give people profits, to give certain people profits, and that's just escalated over time. So what's happening in a simple framing is too much water is being taken, particularly from the top end of the river, full stop. But how we stop that in a federal system with multiple layers of government and weasel words from government can be very, very difficult. But number one, get to know your place, your water. Number two, try to care for whatever you can. And number three, engage in the political processes that make decisions about this stuff. And that includes, supporting things like this art exhibition, political processes, community processes. When you hear folks saying, we need to have greater rights over our own community-based water, listen to them and support them and be in solidarity.